Every morning, I woke up to the soft hum of the world stirring outside my window. The faint sounds of my neighbors starting their day drifted in through the cracked frame, mingling with the aroma of freshly baked bread from the bakery 2 blocks away. It was a comforting routine, like an old song that never seemed to lose its melody. I would stretch my arms above my head, feeling the weight of yesterday's worries slip away, if only for a moment. With a groggy sigh, I rolled out of bed and padded across the cool wooden floorboards of my small apartment. The walls were adorned with photographs of family and friends, each capturing a moment in time that now felt both distant and achingly close. There was my sister, laughing as we posed with our arms around each other during a summer picnic, and my parents, smiling proudly beside the old oak tree in our backyard. I often found myself lingering on those images, as if they held the key to a simpler time, a time before the whispers of war began to seep into our lives. I made my way to the kitchen, where the faint sound of a radio crackled in the corner, filling the air with the soft timbre of a news anchor's voice. I poured myself a cup of coffee, savoring the rich, dark brew as it warmed my hands. The radio chatter was mostly mundane, news about the weather, a local market opening, but every so often, a report about distant conflicts would break through the static, the words tension and unrest lingering like a dark cloud. I brushed off the unease that crept in, reminded myself that those were problems for someone else, far away. I glanced at the clock and hurried to get dressed, slipping into my usual attire, a simple dress that I had sewn myself, patterned with tiny blue flowers that reminded me of spring. It was a small victory, a reminder that I could create something beautiful even when the world felt heavy. I fastened my hair into a loose braid, the familiar motions bringing a sense of calm amidst the worries that ebbed and flowed in my mind. Once ready, I stepped outside, the cool morning air wrapping around me like a gentle embrace. The streets were beginning to fill with life. Neighbors greeted each other with warm smiles, children dashed past on their bicycles, their laughter ringing out like music. I nodded to Mrs. Jensen, an elderly woman who lived 2 doors down, as she tended to her garden. The vibrant colors of her flowers stood in stark contrast to the grayness that seemed to envelop the world lately. "Good morning, dear," she called out, her voice cheerful despite the uncertainty that loomed in the air. "Have you heard about the new rationing plans? It seems they're going to limit sugar and coffee soon." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach at her words, but I forced a smile. "I hadn't heard, Mrs. Jensen. I suppose we'll have to make do with what we have." She chuckled softly, her eyes crinkling. "We've survived worse, haven't we? Just remember to keep your chin up, dear. Better days are ahead." I nodded, though doubt clung to my thoughts. The world had changed in ways I couldn't quite grasp, and the sense of normalcy I clung to felt increasingly fragile. As I walked to the bakery, I passed by posters plastered on the walls, some faded and peeling, urging people to enlist or contribute to the war efforts. I averted my gaze, pretending not to see them, unwilling to confront the reality they represented. The sweet scent of pastries wafted through the air as I approached the bakery, and I felt my resolve soften. I stepped inside, the bell above the door chiming a cheerful welcome. The warmth enveloped me, filled with the comforting sound of laughter and the clinking of plates. Mr. Muller, the baker, greeted me with a broad smile, flour dusting his apron. "Morning. The usual?" he asked, already reaching for a warm loaf of bread. "Yes, please," I replied, grateful for the small kindnesses that punctuated my day. As I paid, I noticed a newspaper lying on the counter, the headlines bold and alarming, but I chose to focus on the aroma of the fresh pastries instead. After leaving the bakery, I made my way to the small library where I worked. As I settled into my desk, the familiar scent of old books filled the air. I loved this place. It was a sanctuary where I could lose myself in stories that transported me far from the uncertainties of the outside world. The hushed whispers of patrons and the soft rustle of pages turning created a soothing rhythm, a reminder that life continued on, even in the face of turmoil. As the hours slipped by, I chatted with regulars, sharing smiles and snippets of conversation that held no hint of the storm brewing beyond our quiet lives. I felt a sense of comfort in these interactions, as if they were a shield against the encroaching darkness. But in the back of my mind, the radio's whispers and Mrs. Jensen's warnings echoed, an unsettling reminder that change was coming. When the day finally ended, I walked home under a sky that had begun to darken, stars flickering into existence like distant hopes. The streets were quieter now, shadows stretching long as the day surrendered to night. I reached my apartment and let the door close behind me, a quiet sigh escaping my lips. I was exhausted, yet my mind buzzed with thoughts I couldn't quite tame. I poured myself a glass of water and settled on the couch, the comforting weight of a blanket draped over me. The radio crackled to life once more, and I listened as the anchor spoke of ongoing tensions in Europe, the fear palpable even through the speakers. My heart raced, but I tried to push the thoughts away, focusing instead on the photographs lining my walls, the faces frozen in time, reminding me of the life I cherished. But even in that moment of solace, a letter sat on the table, its edges worn and yellowed, a remnant of a past I had yet to fully understand. It was addressed to my grandfather, a man I barely knew but had always idolized from afar. I felt an inexplicable pull toward it, as if it held secrets that would unravel my world in ways I wasn't prepared for. Little did I know that this ordinary day, draped in the routine of small pleasures and familiar faces, would be the last before everything changed. The war, lingering like a shadow at the edge of my reality, was about to invade my life in ways I could never have imagined. As the sun rose over the city, its light filtered through the curtains of my apartment, casting soft patterns on the worn wooden floor. I took a deep breath, savoring the familiar scent of freshly baked bread wafting in from the bakery next door. It was a comforting start to another day, yet something felt different in the air. The usual sounds of the city, children laughing, neighbors chatting, the distant hum of life, seemed muted, as if the world was holding its breath. I made my way to the kitchen, my hands trembling slightly as I poured a cup of coffee. The news crackled from the radio on the counter, but the words felt distant, almost surreal. The announcer's voice, usually filled with mundane updates, now held an edge of urgency. Siren tests will occur more frequently in the coming days, he mentioned, his tone grave. I paused, the cup halfway to my lips. I had grown accustomed to these tests, but the thought of more frequent interruptions sent a chill down my spine. After a few moments, I shook off the unease and prepared for my daily visit to the bakery. As I stepped outside, the streets felt heavier, the air thick with an unspoken tension. Mrs. Jensen stood at her doorstep, her expression distant, her gaze fixed on the horizon. I offered her a smile, but she merely nodded, her hands clasped tightly around her shawl. The usual warmth in her eyes was replaced by a flicker of something else, an apprehension that seemed to echo through the neighborhood. At the bakery, the bell above the door jingled softly, and the familiar scent enveloped me. I exchanged pleasantries with the baker, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. He handed me my loaf of bread with a shaky hand, and I noticed the way he glanced nervously at the window, as if expecting someone, or something, to appear. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach as I took my purchase and left, the weight of his unspoken fears lingering in the air. As I walked toward the library, the streets felt different. The usual buzz of life was replaced by an eerie quiet. I passed a group of children playing, but their laughter was strained, punctuated by the occasional glance over their shoulders. One boy sat alone, drawing in the dirt with a stick. I leaned closer and saw he was sketching tanks, their crude forms stark against the ground. A shiver ran through me, and I quickly turned away, trying to shake off the unsettling image. The library was a refuge, a place where I could lose myself in the stories of others. Today, however, even the familiar rows of books felt oppressive. I walked through the aisles, my fingers grazing the spines, but my mind was elsewhere. I could hear whispers from the small reading corner, where two patrons huddled together, their heads bent low. I couldn't catch all their words, but snippets floated to me, rationing, rumors, and the neighbors. One of the librarians, a woman I had often shared quiet moments with, was packing books into a box. Her movements were hurried, her eyes darting around the room as if she feared being watched. I approached her, trying to glean some understanding. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked up, her face pale, and managed a weak smile. "Just preparing for the next shipment," she said, but her voice trembled, revealing the lie beneath her words. As the day wore on, the tension grew. I tried to focus on the tasks at hand, shelving books and helping patrons, but every sound seemed amplified. The shuffling of feet, the rustle of paper, the distant wail of a siren. I glanced at the clock, its ticking now a reminder of the passing moments, each one weighed down by an invisible burden. It felt as though the world outside was inching closer, ready to collide with the fragile peace I clung to. When the lunch hour arrived, I stepped out into the street again, seeking the fresh air to clear my mind. The bakery was bustling as usual, but I noticed more people were gathering, their whispers a low hum that seemed to resonate with the unease I felt. I caught snippets of conversations, Did you hear about the Johnsons? They left without a word. What could it mean? Each phrase hung in the air, heavy with implications, and I felt my heart race. I walked further down the street, drawn by the sound of a distant noise, a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate through the ground. I paused, straining to identify it, but no one else seemed to acknowledge it. People continued their conversations, faces painted with forced smiles, yet I could see the flicker of worry in their eyes, the way they glanced around, as if expecting something terrible to reveal itself. As I returned home later that day, the shadows lengthened, stretching across the pavement like dark fingers reaching for me. I unlocked my door and stepped inside, but the familiar warmth of my apartment felt suddenly foreign. I placed the loaf of bread on the kitchen counter, my hands shaking as I remembered the envelope I had found earlier, the one addressed to my grandfather. Its presence loomed in my mind, a harbinger of secrets I was not yet ready to confront. The radio crackled softly in the background, but my attention was pulled to the window. The sky, once a soft blue, now wore a cloak of gray, heavy clouds gathering like an impending storm. I sat down at the table, my heart pounding in my chest, acutely aware of the silence that enveloped me. It was a silence filled with unspoken fears and questions that lingered in the corners of my mind. I closed my eyes, trying to breathe through the tension that tightened around me. The city felt different now, a fragile facade hiding the cracks beneath. I could sense it in the way my neighbors moved, the way their laughter seemed forced, the way the air felt thick and stifling. We were all pretending, but deep down, we knew something was shifting, something was coming, and it was only a matter of time before it would break through the surface, shattering the fragile peace we had fought so hard to maintain. The day began like any other, the sun casting a gentle light through my window, illuminating the familiar chaos of my room. I took a moment to breathe in the scent of fresh bread wafting from the bakery down the street, a comforting reminder of the normalcy I clung to. I dressed slowly, savoring the routine, but a heaviness settled in my chest, a nagging sensation that something was about to change. As I stepped outside, the air felt different. The usual chatter of neighbors was replaced by a tense silence, interrupted only by the distant sound of sirens. The bakery door swung open, and I greeted Mr. Grayson, the baker, whose face was drawn tight with worry. "Morning," he muttered, avoiding eye contact. I felt a chill run down my spine. His unease was contagious. I decided to head to the library, hoping the familiar aisles of books would provide some solace. The library, usually a refuge, felt stifling today. The whispers of patrons discussing rations and disappearances filled the air like a heavy fog, wrapping around me, suffocating the sense of safety I had always found within those walls. I tried to focus on the pages of a book, but the words blurred together, the unease gnawing at my mind. Just as I was about to leave, the ground shook violently beneath my feet. A deafening roar filled the air, followed by the shrill sound of glass shattering. I stumbled, clutching the edge of a table to steady myself. Panic surged through me as I rushed to the window. A plume of black smoke billowed up from a few blocks away, where a building once stood. I could hardly breathe as the reality hit me. This was not a distant war. It was here, invading the very streets I walked. I darted out of the library, my heart racing. The streets were filled with chaos. People were running, their faces etched with fear, and the acrid smell of smoke and burning debris invaded my senses. I pushed through the crowd, searching for someone I recognized. The sun, once a source of warmth, now seemed ominous, casting long shadows that danced with the flickering flames of destruction. Suddenly, I spotted Mrs. Jensen, her hands trembling as she clutched her daughter close. "What happened?" I called out, my voice barely breaking through the cacophony. Tears streamed down her face as she shook her head, unable to find the words. The terror in her eyes was enough to shatter any semblance of calm I had left. As I moved deeper into the chaos, I saw the remnants of the explosion, twisted metal, shattered glass, and people in shock. I stumbled upon a small group gathered around a figure on the ground, their faces pale and drawn. I felt a sense of dread wash over me as I approached, my heart pounding. When I realized who it was, the world around me fell silent. It was Mr. Thompson, the elderly man from down the street, lying still among the wreckage. I knelt beside him, my hand shaking as I reached out to check for a pulse, but deep down, I knew. The reality of the war hit me like a tidal wave, and the illusion of safety was shattered forever. My breath caught in my throat, and a deep sense of despair settled within me. I looked up, searching for answers in the faces around me, but all I found was fear mirrored in their eyes. The noise of sirens grew louder, and in that moment, My mind raced with what could happen next. Would it be my home next? My family? I felt a surge of anger mixed with helplessness as I stood up, the chaos swirling around me. I turned away from the scene, desperate to escape the reality that was now undeniable. I stumbled down the street, the weight of the letter I had found earlier pressing heavily in my pocket, a reminder of secrets I had yet to uncover. The sky, once bright and clear, was now overcast with thick, dark clouds, reflecting the turmoil within me. As I made my way home, I felt the city closing in around me. The walls that had once provided comfort now felt like a trap. My thoughts spiraled as the faces of my neighbors flashed before me, their lives intertwined with mine in this fragile community. I could no longer pretend everything would be okay. I reached my front door, my hands trembling as I turned the knob. The familiar creak of the hinges felt foreign, and the silence inside was suffocating. I dropped onto the couch, staring blankly at the walls that had once felt like a sanctuary. Now, they felt like a cage, the weight of the world pressing down on me. The realization that my life was irrevocably altered settled heavily in my chest. I was no longer just a bystander to the chaos of war. I was part of it, and there was no escaping the reality of what had happened. The sense of normalcy I had clung to was gone, and I was left to grapple with the shadows of despair creeping into my once safe existence. My heart raced with the thought of what lay ahead, haunted by the names and the letters still waiting to be uncovered, and the fear of losing everything I held dear. The letters sat on the table, an inert weight that seemed to pull at the very fabric of my being. The names scrawled across its surface were etched into my mind, haunting me. I could almost hear them whispering in the dead of night, echoing in the silence that had become my constant companion. I had never known that the man I admired, my grandfather, had fought for the Nazis. The revelation struck like a bolt of lightning, illuminating a dark corner of my family's history that I had never dared to explore. It was the early hours of the morning when I found myself staring at the ceiling, the shadows dancing ominously and the pale light filtering through the curtains. Sleep had become a distant memory, replaced by an incessant churn of thoughts in my mind. I turned to my side, gripping the edge of the mattress, trying to anchor myself in the reality I once knew. But everything felt different now. Everything felt wrong. Should I confront my family about this? Should I tell my mother what I had discovered? The thought made my stomach twist into knots. I could picture her face, the disbelief morphing into pain as she grappled with the implications of her father's past. The decision felt monumental, weighing heavily on my chest. What if she didn't want to hear it? What if she preferred the comforting lies of silence over the harsh truth? I could almost hear my mother's voice, filled with warmth as she shared stories of her childhood, oblivious to the shadows lurking behind those memories. The laughter echoed in my ears, contrasting sharply with the grim reality I now faced. How could I shatter that illusion? How could I risk destroying the remnants of our fragile family bonds for something that seemed so distant, so irrelevant, yet was undeniably real? I rolled out of bed, my feet hitting the cold floor with a jolt. The chill seeped into me, grounding me in the present as I paced the small room. My heart raced, each beat resonating with the turmoil inside. I could feel the weight of the letter in my pocket, a reminder of the conflict that had erupted within me. I reached for it, fingers trembling as I pulled it out and stared at it. The names seemed to mock me, their simplicity belied the complexity of their significance. What if I reached out to someone who might not even be alive? I had heard whispers of my grandfather's comrades, stories of their bravery, their sacrifices. But what if they were just as tainted as he was? I felt the heat rise in my cheeks at the thought. I was torn between the desire to uncover the truth and the fear of what I might find. The past was a labyrinth, and I had no idea where it would lead me. The kitchen was dark, the remnants of an unfinished meal still on the table. I absent-mindedly reached for the half-eaten bread, the crust stale and hard. It felt like a metaphor for everything around me. Something once nourishing turned bitter and inedible. I tossed it into the trash, my mind racing with thoughts of betrayal and loyalty. How could I reconcile my love for my family with the ugliness of their past? As I stood there, I heard a noise from outside, a distant siren, a reminder that the world beyond my walls was still in turmoil. The war raged on, but I felt trapped in my own battle, wrestling with questions that had no easy answers. I wanted to help my neighbors, to stand by them as they faced their own struggles, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was a ticking time bomb, carrying the weight of my grandfather's legacy on my shoulders. What if the truth I uncovered could put them in danger? I remembered Mrs. Jensen, her eyes filled with worry as she spoke of the rations and the disappearances. I had seen the fear in her gaze, and it mirrored my own. Should I confide in her? Would it be wise to share my burden, or would it only serve to deepen my isolation? I felt a pang of guilt at the thought of keeping this secret from her, but I also feared the repercussions that might follow. Panic surged through me as I paced back to my room, my breath coming in short gasps. I gripped the edge of the chair, feeling the wood dig into my palms. Would it be better to keep silent, to protect my family and myself, even if it meant burying the truth forever? Or should I risk everything to uncover what lay beneath the surface? The thought of remaining in ignorance felt unbearable, yet the idea of exposing the truth was equally daunting. I sank into the chair, tears threatening to spill over. How could I navigate this treacherous terrain? I glanced at the window, the street outside eerily quiet, as if holding its breath for what was to come. The world felt so vast, yet I felt so small, trapped in this cycle of fear and uncertainty. I recalled fleeting memories of laughter, of warmth, of a time before the shadows closed in. Would I ever be able to return to that innocence? A part of me longed for clarity, for someone to tell me what to do. Yet deep down, I knew that this was my struggle, my burden to bear. The choices I made now would echo through the corridors of my family's history, leaving marks that could never be erased. I closed my eyes, envisioning different futures, each one shaped by the decisions I was yet to make. I was caught in a web of confusion, struggling to find a way forward. The weight of the letter, the names, the legacy, they all bore down on me like a storm cloud ready to unleash its fury. I had to choose. But as the night deepened, I remained paralyzed, caught between the past that had shaped me and the future that awaited, a future laden with uncertainty and fear. The room felt like it was closing in on me, the walls pressing with the weight of the letter I had found. I stared at the names scrawled across the page, each one a ghost from my grandfather's past, tethering me to a history I couldn't bear to acknowledge. The flickering light bulb above cast shadows that danced across the walls, mimicking the turmoil in my heart. I could hear the distant sounds of chaos outside, the sirens wailing like lost souls, reminding me that the war was not just a shadow, it was my reality. I stood at the window, watching the rain begin to fall, heavy droplets hitting the metal awning below, creating a rhythm that matched my racing thoughts. The letter felt like a curse, a reveal that shattered the memories I had treasured. My grandfather, a man I had adored, had fought for an ideology that was now a source of shame. I could feel the anger boiling within me, but it was quickly overtaken by a creeping fear. The knowledge threatened to consume me, and I knew I had two choices: confront my family or bury the truth forever, a secret locked away like a bomb waiting to explode. The decision crashed upon me like the thunder outside. I couldn't stay silent. I had to confront the past, not just for myself, but for the ghosts of those whose lives had been lost. My heart raced as I grabbed the letter, the paper crinkling beneath my fingers, and I stormed out of the house. The streets were slick with rain, the smell of wet earth rising to meet me as I made my way toward my grandparents' old home. Each step felt heavy, the weight of the envelope pulling me down like an anchor. When I arrived, the door stood ajar, creaking slightly in the wind. I hesitated for a moment, the sound of my own heartbeat drowning out the chaos surrounding me. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open. Inside, the familiar scent of old wood and dust hit me, but it was overshadowed by the sense of foreboding that loomed in the air. My mother was in the kitchen, her back turned to me as she stirred a pot on the stove. I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she held herself as if ready for an argument. "Mom," I said, my voice trembling. She turned, surprise flickering across her face before it settled into concern. "What's wrong?" she asked, her eyes narrowing. I pulled the letter from my pocket, my hands shaking as I unfolded it. "I found something. Something about Grandpa." The words tumbled out like marbles rolling down a hill, chaotic and unstoppable. Her expression shifted, a blend of confusion and fear. "What do you mean?" "His name, the names in this letter, they're connected to the Nazis. He fought for them. How could he?" The accusation hung in the air, sharp and cutting. The pot on the stove began to boil over, but I couldn't focus on anything but my mother's face, which had paled at my revelation. "Where did you find this?" she demanded, her voice rising. "In his things. It's true, isn't it?" I pressed, desperate for answers, for clarity in this storm of emotions. She took a step back, her hands trembling as she wiped them on her apron. "We didn't want you to know. It was a different time, a different world." "Different world? People died, Mom. How can you justify this?" I shouted, the anger boiling over as tears stung my eyes. "He fought for a regime that destroyed families, cultures. How could you let me idolize him?" The silence that fell was thick, filled with the unspoken truths that loomed between us. My mother's gaze dropped to the floor, and for a moment, I thought she might break. Instead, she straightened, her voice low and trembling. "Because he loved us. Because he tried to protect us. We all did what we thought was right in those times." The pain in her eyes mirrored my own, and I felt a pang of guilt for what I was doing. But I couldn't turn back now. I need to know more. I can't live with this secret. It's tearing me apart. "Then what do you want?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want to confront him. I want to understand why he did what he did. I need to know if he was a monster or just a man caught in a terrible situation." The rain poured harder outside, and the sound of it mixed with the chaos in my heart, drowning out everything else. My mother shook her head. "You can't. He's gone, and there are things you don't understand." "I have to try," I said, my resolve hardening. "I can't just pretend it didn't happen. I won't let that part of me linger in the shadows. This letter, these names, they matter. They need to be acknowledged." She looked away, and I could see the hurt in her eyes, the pain of a truth she had tried so hard to keep buried. "You're going to hurt yourself. You're going to hurt us all." But I knew I had already made my choice. The door to the past was open, and I had to walk through it, even if it meant facing the consequences alone. I stepped back, the rain still pounding against the windows, the world outside a blur of chaos. "I have to do this, Mom. I need to know who I am." With that, I turned and left, feeling the weight of the letter still in my pocket, a reminder of the truth I had chosen to confront. The door closed behind me with a finality that echoed in my heart, and as I stepped back into the rain, I felt a mixture of fear and determination. This was my journey now, one I had to take, no matter where it led. A few weeks had passed since that fateful confrontation with my mother. The days blurred into one another, as if time itself had withdrawn from the chaos outside. I found myself retreating to the corner of my small kitchen each morning, the familiar scent of freshly baked bread still lingering in the air from the bakery next door. But now, the warmth of those aromas no longer brought me the same comfort. Instead, they felt like a bittersweet reminder of what I had lost and what I had discovered. I sat at the table, a cup of coffee untouched before me, the steam rising into the still morning air. It was a ritual I had clung to for years, but now it felt hollow. Each sip had once been a moment of solace, but now it was a reminder of the conversations I would never have with Mr. Thompson, of the laughter that had filled our street, now silenced by the weight of our shared grief. The explosion that had ripped through our town had taken more than just lives. It had stolen the innocence of our community, leaving behind an echo of fear and uncertainty. The envelope remained tucked away in the drawer, a heavy, unyielding presence that I couldn't quite banish from my mind. I hadn't opened it since that day. The name scrawled in my grandfather's handwriting haunted me, words that felt like chains binding me to a past I was only beginning to understand. Each name was a story, a life I had no right to judge without knowing the full truth. I realized now that confronting my family wasn't just about uncovering a dark past. It was about wrestling with my own identity. As I sat there, I recalled my grandfather's image, a man I had never known, yet whose choices felt like a shadow cast over my life. I wondered if he had been a monster or merely a man caught in a web of circumstance. The stories my mother had shared, the ones she had tried to shield me from, began to unravel in my mind, revealing a tapestry woven with pain and survival. I understood now that our family's history was not a simple narrative of good versus evil. It was layered, complex, just like the world outside my window. I stood up, walked to the drawer, and pulled out the envelope. I hesitated for a moment, but the urge to confront the truth overwhelmed me. I opened it, the brittle paper feeling alien against my fingertips. The names stared back at me, and with each one, I felt the weight of their lives pressing against my heart. I imagined the faces behind those names, the stories that had led them into the conflict. I knew I couldn't erase the past, nor could I reshape it, but I could acknowledge it. I could honor it. I took the letter outside, where the sun was beginning to set, casting a golden hue over the remnants of our town. I walked to the small park where children used to play, where laughter once echoed. I found a quiet spot beneath a tree, its branches swaying gently in the evening breeze. It was a moment of peace amidst the turmoil, and I felt the urge to let go. I held the letter tightly and, with a deep breath, tore it into pieces. Each rip was a release, a shedding of the burden I had carried for so long. I watched as the fragments danced in the wind, swirling away from me, a testament to the power of letting go. As night fell, I returned home, feeling lighter, though not entirely free. The world outside remained chaotic. I could still hear the distant sounds of sirens and the rumble of unrest, but within me, a quiet transformation had begun. I was no longer just a bystander to my family's history. I was a participant in my own narrative, learning to navigate the complexities of my identity. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself revisiting the bakery more often. Each loaf of bread I bought felt like a small act of defiance against the darkness surrounding us. I chatted with the baker, sharing moments of laughter and warmth, slowly rebuilding the connections that had frayed in the wake of loss. The world outside was still unpredictable, but in those small exchanges, I found a semblance of hope. I realized that while I could not change what had happened, I could forge my own path moving forward. I began to write in a journal, pouring my thoughts onto the pages, capturing the essence of my experiences, the fears, the questions, and the moments of clarity. It became a refuge, a place where I could confront my past without judgment, a tool for understanding the intricate tapestry of my lineage. And so, I embraced the uncertainty of my existence, acknowledging that life would continue to unfold, even amidst the chaos. I learned that healing was not linear. It was a journey filled with setbacks and progress. Some days were heavier than others, but I was beginning to find beauty in the struggle. As I sat at my kitchen table one morning, I finally lifted the coffee cup to my lips. The warmth seeped into my being, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of peace. The world outside still echoed with the remnants of war, but within me, there was a quiet resilience emerging. I was learning to reconcile the past with the present, to honor the memories of those lost while carving out my own future. In the stillness of that moment, I understood that my journey was just beginning. The names in the envelope would always be a part of me, but they no longer defined me. I was ready to move forward, carrying their stories with me, allowing them to become a part of my own narrative. If this story touched you in any way, consider subscribing. Stories like this need to be told and heard.